Hello everybody, it's time for another David's Dev Diary video with your host David and narrator David. Today I wanted to talk about the Space and Flight Simulation System, which was released last week as part of our wiltOS Week 2020 anniversary smorgasbord celebration thing. If you don't know what that week is, you're just popping on. Essentially, we celebrate our anniversary by doing a week full of releases, things that are in the back burner, things that we think should be released, etc. Gives us the opportunity to do some meme content as well as sort of clean up the pipeline of the stuff that we had in the back and never actually pushed out. And the Space and Flight Simulation System was one of those things where I put the proof of concept like 2 years ago. Maybe even 2.5. It's hard to remember at this point, but if you were familiar with it originally, then you'd see that it really was something that was going to happen one way or another, because it was basically done back then, but then things started getting in the way. So I'm going to talk a little bit about that, and expect this to be slightly more technical. A long time ago, in a studio far, far away, somebody was developing the next Star Wars Battlefront game. It was supposed to be the next installment of the 2005 version, aptly titled Star Wars Battlefront 3, right? And in this game, they had this interesting idea that the ground fighting and space fighting should occur on the same map. That is to say, somebody on the ground level can grab a ship and fly up to space, and likewise somebody from space can fly down to the ground, provide some support. And each sector in that was supposed to sort of influence each other in some way, whether that be a reinforcement count or some other bonus like that. And, unfortunately this game never got released, and then eventually DICE would take over and they would release a Star Wars Battlefront that everybody knows now and some people reject as a Star Wars Battlefront game. But the concept itself was extremely interesting and was the driving force behind the Space and Flight Simulation System. Although, when it first started, it was just called the Space Simulation because really I'd only focused on a singular vehicle at that point. So there were two development, trees that were being made for that Space Simulation System. Actually, there's three, but I guess one of them wasn't so fleshed out, and eventually it would be merged with the main branch. Okay, so we'll talk about them all. Why not? So three branches that were being made, three trees, and each one has sort of distinct thing, but they have one main sort of thing in common as well. So for the first one, which is actually extremely basic, it would have those hyperspace jump points that we have now, but instead of jumping you to a miniaturized area, it would actually prevent the level itself from being drawn and no collide the ship with the entire level and everything on the level. Essentially, the ship would only be able to interact with other things that are in hyperspace, and they wouldn't be able to see any of the level. Now at this point, you would draw some sort of space, you draw some textures, you make the whole area that they do see pretty. And this would work out. Honestly, this is the one that I was hoping was going to work out the most, because it required the least amount of work and it kept all the functions intact. If you didn't know this, then I'll tell you now, when you no-collide something with another property, it includes everything that entity will produce. So the ship being able to shoot lasers would actually go through the level because that's attached to the ship. Those traces are checked by the no collide filter, and then it obviously would no collide, right? And for the photons and those extra right clicks, because some of them do spawn entities that they need to do some damage, they need to hit something. It's easily controllable for them to no collide because there's a hook that actually checks if something was created, and then you just check, hey, is the parent of this guy in hyperspace? Yes, then no collided, and then boom, you'd have all those things intact. Super easy. Would have been great if it worked, But I got 2 words for the reason why it didn't work, and that comes down to crazy physics. Yes, the ship can fly around the level, but the source engine physics does not like when it's out of bounds to a certain point, and it will eventually yell out crazy physics and remove the entity that is causing it. Which is a good idea because crazy physics can actually crash your entire Garry's mod. So you want to get those guys solved while you have them. And really the only other solution would have been to set the origin point or move them once the crazy physics is detected, since there is a hook that does check crazy physics, but it's way too risky at that point. You don't want to mess around with something like that, especially when it's unstable. Maybe I'll put out that original version on the GitHub or on Bitbucket or whatever repo. People won't tell me nothing. But it have a heavy disclaimer that says this may mess things up. But with that one sort of, it was such a good idea that now the question became, well, how do we control that to stop crazy physics from happening? And that led to, more developments on the second branch, the one we know the most, which was, well, we can just shrink the ship down, and then you would have all sorts of things going on there, where the zones can be customized, you can create little planets, you can do all sorts of scene building and stuff like that, so that you have a lively space area without needing to allocate a map for it, right? But before we start talking about the hurdles of that one, since that's the one that ended up coming out, let's go into that third branch really quickly, which is essentially the same as the first branch with one twist. So this was just something that was really fun to do, and it ended up not being so practical because it did have its own hurdles and its own problems, and crazy physics was still a problem, but it's actually kind of neat to see from a conceptual level. And that was essentially taking a map, right? Having the hyperspace jump point go somewhere, and then having the actual space zone have different exits for that ship to take. And those exits would actually be other maps. So you would be able to fly from Flatgrass into GM Construct through the jump point, and you would be able to actually interact with GM Construct. And honestly, this worked out. There was a public script that was made by Meepin, and he had put it on his GitHub, and it essentially was a BSP parser. You'd be able to actually go through the entire thing. The textures wouldn't load sometimes because there maybe were some offset issues, or they were baked into the maps, all sorts of things like that. But you would actually be able to get with those map interactions through some clever server-side stuff by, operating on the mesh that's being produced and creating the physics interactions, no colliding the correct parts, etc., etc. But, this had a lot of problems on its own. First of all, maps could be way too big and they would cause issues, and generally displacements would cause 1,000 issues sometimes when being parsed. So there were a lot of hurdles, but it was just a cool idea to try and develop, and yeah, that just is what it is. But okay, we're gonna go back to the second one because that's the one that we all know, right? So you have your jump points, you have the shrinking happening, you think everything is perfect. You can just shrink the entity and it should work fine, right? Wrong. There's a couple of things that could go wrong with that were actually handled before the workshop release and actually had to be removed afterwards. And this is going to come down to the bases for flying that I used. So just to give a pre-warning here, don't get offended. I'm pretty sure there's only 3 vehicle bases that people use for flying, being WAC, LFS, and then the Star Wars vehicles pot thing that, it has all the different episodes and stuff like that. I was focusing mostly on the Star Wars vehicles thing. When I started adding support for other things, that actually gimped the add-on at the end. So allow me to explain, right? when you shrink the entity, it doesn't shrink all the other things with it, right? It doesn't shrink the trace look positions. It doesn't shrink the particle effects, all sorts of things. But this isn't particularly hard to work with. Actually, we'll be pushing out that workshop update that adds the dogfighting that was originally removed in the workshop release, right? And repositioning bullets and repositioning the photons, this isn't particularly difficult work. You can easily do all that stuff and scale it down. But scaling the ship was actually the problem. So the Star Wars Vehicles one worked perfectly. I could just scale the ship down. The passengers would work, everything would work fine, the repositioning would work, all of that would be checked. But as soon as I added LFS support, everything went to hell. And you may be asking, well, when I actually hope you're asking, why the hell would that make any difference? Well, unlike the Star Wars Vehicles base, LFS is actually a vehicle base. It's not an entity that you spectate. It is really a vehicle. It's like a Jeep or an airboat or something. I mean, it's a passenger pod. But all of the hit boxes and physics boxes that come with that ship is bound to the vehicle. And let me tell you, the Source Engine does not like scaling its vehicles down. It does not like it one bit. It will scale the model down, but those physics will damn well be intact. So you will have giant ship physics even though you are tiny. So that is not a solution at all. But with the Star Wars Vehicles, because it's just an entity, it doesn't have that internal sort of, I guess, block, and it's able to scale down the physics properly after you activate it. Everything is fine and dandy. And yeah, that would have been nice, but, you know, can't get everything. So I essentially had to make my own fighter base thing so that I can pull as much information as I can from the vehicles and then have them be able to fly it with no issue. And that unfortunately led to some control differences. It led to me having to remove the trace shooting because it needed to be handled differently due to PVS issues, and particles couldn't be compressed. It's just all sorts of things that would eventually cause that to be removed. But after that main hurdle, everything else was essentially easy. You add some extra stuff to the tools. You make sure that the passengers get the data that they need to see the ship when it's flying, and all of that, is good to go there. I'm hoping that in these next few months that there's some breakthroughs in the vehicle sort of handling, I guess, because I would really like to go back to just shrinking the damn vehicle, but I completely understand that this is probably dug deep in the physics engine and likely not accessible by by the Face Punch team. So it's something that I'll hold all my hopes for, but am just gonna work around making sure that the actual bases are there. So this is I think that my closing statement here is gonna be just talking about what I want to do with it. I was talking in the Discord, and people were suggesting, well, the controls are a little different. I want to be able to shoot animations, things like that. And really, the aesthetic part of it, I got no problems doing. I'm probably going to make some separate ship bases for their parent bases, so that you can have those LFS controls still on the ship. But really, I do want to try and just bring it back to speed and try to make that transition a little seamless, so that it's just an all-around fun experience for everybody. I mean, it's a cool concept, and that should be how it is. So, and that is 15 minutes long. Okay, I'm gonna stop here. I mean, I hope you learned something. I hope it was interesting. If you stuck around for 15 minutes, I would really like to hear your feedback if you stuck around for 15 minutes. Or if you didn't really, complain that it was too long. I don't know. You just leave a comment down, talk to me on the Discord, if you liked it, like it. If you don't like it, dislike it, but at least tell me why. I can't approve it if you don't tell me. And you know, have a good one. I think the next video is gonna be long too, to be honest with you, but I'm happy you stuck around. And if I didn't already say it, because apparently I have short-term memory loss, or I guess in this case long-term memory loss, subscribe if you like to see more of these and want to be up to date. You know, I mean, who you hurting? You're only helping me and yourself by doing something you want. So, you know, yeah. Goodbye.